Hello, and welcome to This is USG, a video podcast by the universities at Shady Grove. 9 universities, 1 campus, great results. I'm Ann Kademian, Executive Director of the universities at Shady Grove. In preparation for our podcast today, I've been thinking about the term authentic leadership. You know, when someone leads from their core values, from their life experience, their life lessons, in a way that informs and guides their vision and their decisions. Well, we are very fortunate in Montgomery County to have the authentic leadership of Councilmember Will Jawando, who draws upon his life experience growing up in Silver Spring, Maryland, the many chapters of his life and the mentors or fathers who guided and supported him, and his commitment to priorities around affordable housing, a green economy, family sustaining wages, racial equity and social justice, and a robust educational system and opportunities for all. A lawyer, an author, an activist, former member of President Obama's administration, political leader, and now the new chair of the council, the County Council's Education and Culture Committee, Councilmember Will Jawando. Welcome to This is USG.
Thank you, Dr. Kademian. I'm going to have to bottle you up and take that introduction on the road. That was well said. Thank you. And I was like, who's she talking about? You know, but no, thank you for having me, and it's great to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I, I've been really enjoying preparing for this conversation today and learning more about your life experience and, of course, your book, which we'll talk more about as well. But I wonder if we could start at the beginning. You have a life of public service, of leadership and public service. And could you reflect a little bit about your early childhood, your education? What is it about some of your early experiences, do you think, that really motivated you to live a life of public service? What are some of the things that stand out for you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. As you mentioned in the introduction, I was born and raised here in Silver Spring, Maryland, in our great county. The Wallet Hub rankings just came out again, and Silver Spring is one of the top 10 most diverse cities in the country. We have 4 located here in Montgomery County: Germantown, Gaithersburg, and where you're located, and then also Rockville, and that really is a kind of an important frame for me. But my parents came here for the diversity, for the economic opportunity. My dad, a Nigerian immigrant, my mom, a white woman from Kansas. They met in college in Kansas, and in rural Kansas, Hayes, Kansas, and just experienced a lot of discrimination, but also lack of economic opportunity. And so they moved here. And this is where I was born and raised. And we were low income. My parents divorced when I was 6 years old. My mom, I lived with my mother, and though my father was physically present in the household up until that point, we didn't have much of a relationship. He was dealing with clinical depression and bouncing from job to job and having serious issues. And so my mom was really that stabilizing force. I was fortunate, as you mentioned, to have a lot of other mentors. But from an early age, my mom always said I had a little soapbox. I was very attuned to things when things were not equal or fair. I had a very strong sense of fairness early on. If I saw a person experiencing homelessness outside McDonald's, I would give them whatever dollar coins I had, and I would be like, well, why are they there? And I always would inquire about that. It never sat right with me. And I think that just continued throughout my life, and ups and downs, and kind of came to a head in several situations, living in housing that wasn't habitable, dealing with significant infestations growing up, living with my mom, and not having, taking public transportation, having our, car, that when we did have a car, having it break down a lot and not being able to rely on it. And so food insecurity, go down the list. But kind of came to a head for me in high school, where I had started to transition into the middle class. My mother had remarried in the mid 90s. I was in high school in the early 90s, and the tech boom, the economy started to improve somewhat for more people. And we bought our first home when I was in high school. And I had started to move into the middle class, and lost one of my best friends to gun violence as I was coming out of high school. And it caused me to really, in a deep way, reflect on the disparities and inequities and analyze why I was getting ready to go to college on a scholarship and he was in a casket. And I traced it back to really just not that I was any better than him or he was any worse than me. It was just access to opportunity, access to these mentors, access to caring adults, access to resources like after school programs and educational opportunity. And that really got me upset, and I think was consistent with my early childhood of just noticing inequity. I saw downtown Silver Spring grow. City Place Mall was built in 1995, and that was a huge deal for downtown Silver Spring. But I lived 2 miles away where I was living in horrible housing, and there was violence and gunshots and things. And I was like, how could they be so close and be so different? And so it kind of built over the course of my life, and always was pulling those strings, but it really came to a head when I lost my friend. And that I was convinced then, and still am, to change those circumstances that lead to those inequities. And I've really just been pulling on those strings, through law school, through Capitol Hill, the White House, and now as an elected leader, really been pulling those strings for most of my life.
Yeah, I read the parts about losing your friend to gun violence, and such a talented, incredible young man. I'm very sorry for your loss. Yeah, I
think about him a lot.
I can imagine. Yeah, so you have this. You pull on this commitment to justice. You pull on this these life experiences. I mean it when I say this is truly authentic leadership. I think this is using your life experiences in a way that motivates and informs what you do. Talk a little bit about education. You're now the chair of the Education and Culture Committee, a committee that's very important for us here at the universities at Shady Grove, for all of our education partners, Montgomery College, Montgomery County Public Schools. And talk about the importance of this committee. You're the chair. There's a lot. It's a large budget. It's also foundationally important here in Montgomery County. Why did you want this committee? And again, if you can connect it to some of your own experience as to why this committee is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I knew in the investigation of those disparities and those pulling of those proverbial strings, it was clear to me early on that educational opportunity was a clear difference maker in my life, and not just my life. And there's research, as documents that. When I went to 4 schools before I was in 8th grade. I bounced around a lot. I had teachers that didn't believe in me. I had some that did. I talk about Mr. Williams, who's one of my 7 Black fathers in my book, who was a transformational figure, MCPS, 4th grade elementary math teacher at Oakview Elementary. So I had some ups and downs there, and I saw the difference, but also that a great teacher can make in an educational opportunity, someone who believes in you. And then when I went to high school, I got a scholarship to St. John's College High School, and I really saw the difference that focused, smaller class size, the things that people pay for, frankly, at private schools. And I got a scholarship, but I saw the difference that made, and I struggled. And I graduated. I was not a great student in high school. I had potential, but I didn't have some of those foundational things that I had to pick up later. And that experience for me, in addition to losing Kalfani, who's my friend who passed away, really showed, and in the lives of other friends, there was, you see this in other people in your community, those who have opportunity, who are believed in, who have access to teachers who look like them, who have after school and wraparound services and places to go. That it was clear to me that those were the folks who did well. Not to say they didn't have challenges, but they had opportunity and did well. And so I was very clear that educational opportunity was something I wanted to work on from in my early career when I was first getting to Capitol Hill. I had the chance to work on No Child Left Behind and the Higher Education Act and Head Starts and Workforce Investment Act, big, large bills that have a huge impact on how we do P through J, to your point, pre-K through J, the jobs, education here in the county and obviously state and in the country. And I did that, and I wanted to learn about that and learn about those bills and those pieces of legislation and how they operated and how they trickled down to the states, because I knew how important it was in my life and the lives of folks in my community. So I always knew I wanted to work on education. The other thing I was really interested in was criminal justice, because I knew about the negative interactions with law enforcement, but also the need for safe communities, growing up in a community that wasn't always safe, and that dichotomy that is not unknown to many people. And so I knew if the best way you could keep people out of the criminal justice system was to give them opportunity early in life through education. And then if you did get in touch with the criminal justice system, how do you feed people back in a rehabilitative way and not just a punitive model? And so those were the issues I really gravitated to early on in college and law school, and then in my early professional career, because I knew, but education was certainly the first in the core. And that's why I wanted to chair the education committee, because if you get that right, that 90% of brain development that happens before you're 5, and you put people on a good track and support them throughout, you're going to have good outcomes. And we know that works. We just have to have the commitment and public will and the data analysis and the funding and all the things that you work on every day to create those pipelines of opportunity and success for people. And we're still working on it, obviously, but that's why I think education is, as many have said, is the great equalizer.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that so much. It's a great understanding of the challenges and a great way to tackle so many of the challenges we have as well. You served in the Obama administration, which is very exciting. I imagine that was a really formative time in your life. You've served in the Congress. You said you noted you worked on the No Child Left Behind Act, and so you've worked at the federal level in big and impactful ways. And you're leading now at the county level, where the rubber meets the road, right? Where the action happens. And I wonder, do you have any insights that you take from your time at the federal level, working on kind of national broad policy, to how you think about the immediate challenges in Montgomery County? How does your federal experience inform your leadership of the Education and Culture Committee now? I'm curious what those reflections might be.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I think about quite often. And I'm very thankful to have had those experiences at both levels of government, because I think it helps inform my perspective and what I'm able to bring to bear. At the federal level, we were always looking for local examples of success. And it's really a reminder, that, not only is all politics local, innovation is often local. And it comes from the ground up, just like most good things, ground up and bottom out, or bottom up and middle out, as we say, and that the ideas and promising programs and practices often originate at the local level. And there is always a constant desire, because there's a danger at the federal level when you're working on these large bills and large appropriations, to lose the context, and also understand that the context is different. There are some core things that have to happen everywhere, but local jurisdictions need flexibility to meet the needs of their communities, right? And I think that's something that I always am reminded of here at the local level. We in many ways in Montgomery County are a microcosm of where America is and is heading, in that, we're a diverse community. We're dealing with the same challenges historically of America. We are de facto segregated, for the legacy of discrimination in this county, both racially and economically, in many ways. But we do have great promise in so many parts of our county as well, as far as how to approach some of the historic challenges of this country and of this world in a way that's innovative, and that's a great history in Montgomery County. And so we kind of have our own standard to meet and exceed. And I think the challenge is always, for me, is how do we scale what works in partnership with federal and state governments and with community-based institutions and organizations and educational institutions. So we need to constantly kind of be evaluating and looking at what works, making the case for expanded resources, and understanding the changing nature of who we are. When I was born, I'm 40 years old. When I was born here, the school system was, 85% white, and that has changed dramatically just in a lifetime or half a lifetime. And systems can tend to be slow to catch up to that. And so I think what I take from the federal level is, one, you need the resources and the flexibility to be able to implement at the local level solutions that are scalable, and you need that partnership. And oftentimes we're trying to manage, big, huge problems. We're the 14th largest school district in the country, as we have 160,000 plus students. And we're trying to meet the needs of a very diverse school system where 40% of our kids or more are in poverty. Another, thing that's changed in the last couple of decades, with a system that wasn't, and funding that wasn't meant to meet those needs. And so that's often, I think, where the federal government can help, right? We saw that in the pandemic where they came in with huge amounts of resources because it was an emergency, but we were able to use that to kind of try to address things in a more urgent way and do some innovative things with the resources. So there's a push-pull there, and it's needed, and both need to be communicating with one another about what's working, what's not, what flexibility is needed, how we can change the laws that govern what we do, et cetera. And I think government works best when you have that kind of continual feedback loop. And that's one of the things that stuck out to me, having worked in both places.
Yeah, that's a great analysis. I think it's, it's federalism at its best. I have two big takeaways from what you just said. One is all innovation is local, and that, the innovation that can come from, trying to solve challenges in real time, right there in your community is so important for the innovation. And then the scalable challenge, how do we scale what works? And all of that underlies the need for really good data as well, that we're able to see how the innovations are working, where they're not, and then to be able to model and scale those as well. So I really appreciate that answer and that response. I wonder if we could take just a little bit of a detour, and I'd love to talk about your book. And I've listened to you talk about this on different occasions, and just really impressed by the way you've reframed some of this conversation around fatherhood, and the way you embrace these seven individuals as fathers, each of them bringing something different to your life. Could you talk a little bit about the process of writing this book? What gave you the idea to write this book? When did you know you had a book to write, and what it was like writing this as well? I imagine it was something of an emotional journey to go back and reflect on your life experiences with each of these incredible individuals.
It really was, and I think it wouldn't have happened at least as quickly as it did, but for a confluence of several events. Obviously, the pandemic created, we're talking on Zoom right now, something that we probably didn't know what it was 3 years ago, right? I know I didn't, maybe you did, Ann, because you're on the cutting edge, but I hadn't heard of Zoom. And, all the community meetings had stopped. And so I had but we were dealing with, I had some time and space, right? We were still working, but we were meeting remotely. And there was also a lot of pain and hurt happening. we all went through something in the pandemic. I think pain in a lot of ways can bring us together and create empathy. We all lost someone or know someone who lost somebody through the pandemic from the health side of it. We all know someone who was economically impacted, lost their job or their business. And for many of us, especially particularly African Americans, people of color, we also dealt with the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and a global outcry about injustice and being treated fairly by the state in the form of policing and so many other systems. All that happened at the same time. I think people forget that happened in the same kind of 2-year period, and that was hurtful for me personally and as a community. And then being a local leader, trying to respond to the emergency of food and the health pandemic and the exacerbation of disparities that have festered for so long and just were blown wide open because that's what happens when you have a pandemic, and systems that were not there or that were weakened were exposed, and trying to respond to that. So it was a difficult time for all of us.
Yeah.
And that created kind of, I think, the time, the space, and also the moment where I wanted to write something affirmative, something that I could do or that we could do as a community based on what had happened for me. These mentors and so many others. I highlight 7, but obviously there's many, including, women and non-African American men and others who were part of the village and community that helped make me who I am. But I wanted to call out in particular these 7 men, these 7 Black men, because often Black fatherhood, Black men and boys are maligned and are misunderstood, and there's so little out there about our stories and who we are, and the power we have when we engage with one another to literally be the life raft in the midst of the storm of systemic racism and inequity. And that's what these men were to me. They fathered me, they guided me, they helped me through troubled waters, and they did it all throughout my life. I meet Mr. Williams, and when I'm 9 years old in 4th grade, I only know him for 9 months, never see him again. I'm talking about him 30 years later because he had a transformational impact, and the data backs that impact up. We know that if a young child, Black child, has a Black teacher, they're much more likely to graduate high school. If they have 2 in a row, add another 25% to that likelihood. And data has shown about that role model effect in the classroom. But President Obama, I meet when I'm a 20-something working on Capitol Hill and trying to learn how to be a policy professional, be a husband and a father. I get married and have 2 of my 4 children while I'm working for him. And so he's really impactful in a different way, but all needed and everyone in between. And I got the idea to frame the book, and this is how I'll end, just to your question, there was this study on race and economic opportunity done by researchers out of Harvard and Stanford, and combined with data from the IRS and the Census Bureau, where it was a landmark study, came out in 2018, and it showed a lot of really interesting things, but it looked at the 20 million children who were born between 1978 and 1983 in this country. I'm in that group. There's 20 million children, and it compared their census data, so level of education of the parents, where they lived, how many 1-parent, 2-parent household, all the things you learn from the census, and matched it up with their IRS data when they were born, their parents, and then these children 35, 40 years later. So it was the first time you had this really longitudinal study, apples to apples, of 20 million of that size. And it showed some very interesting things. It's still being used. There's a whole website around the data, but the New York Times released it in 2018. And one of the things it showed, and the reason they interviewed me and it helped me frame the book, was that in 99% of census tracts, Black boys and white boys from the same communities with the same background, same level of education, same income, same parent structure, all the things we hear about why some people succeed and others don't, and you controlled for that, they had wide earnings gaps 40 years later. So with the white boys earning much more than the Black boys. And that was true in 99% of census tracts. If you just think about the devastation of that, how consistently devastating that is, that if you are born in the same census tract, which is like 1,100 people, to the same income level parents, and have the same kind of family structure, level of education, you had wide earnings gaps, which is just one measure of health and success. It wasn't true in these 1% zip codes, of which downtown Silver Spring was 20910, where I didn't live, but my mother worked. And when the researchers and the reporter came to interview me for the New York Times, and I ended up being included in this story as the kind of as the face of some of the data, they told me that a statistically significant feature of these 1% zip codes was that they had a larger percentage of working class Black fathers in them. And I realized and had a light bulb moment that I meet 4 of my 7 Black fathers that I chronicle in my book in that zip code 20910.
Interesting.
And so it was that, along with the moment in time with the pandemic, kind of helped me frame and then write the book starting around 2018, 2019, and then through the pandemic.
Well, thank you for writing the book, and thank you for sharing that as well. I think a lot of times we see books on the market and we don't realize what's behind all of that, the journey, the reflection, the sometimes pain and struggle as well. And so thank you for writing the book, and thank you for sharing that as well. I'll close out with a more general question. You know, here at the universities at Shady Grove last week, we had a workshop on community wealth building, and community wealth building is one of our strategic priorities here at Shady Grove, to be very intentional and thoughtful about our role in the development of the economy, the equitable development of the economy, and keeping wealth here in the county and in neighborhoods where it's most needed, and how we shop as a state agency, and how we engage, but also of course our educational mission as well. And so community wealth building is we're really exploring how this can become a bigger frame for what we do as an educational institution, how we partner with our educational partners, but just this kind of intentional focus on what we're doing and the impact of how we behave as an anchor institution as well. And I was thinking about your leadership around universal basic income and wanting to promote universal basic income as a really important part of community wealth building as well. And I'm wondering if this concept of community wealth building, it's not new. It's been around. Activists have been promoting greater equity in our economy for many years, but there's a movement now across the globe for communities and institutions to be thinking more intentionally about this. Could you just reflect on this idea, especially perhaps from your universal basic income idea? What motivated that? And how do you see that as something that can be beneficial for Montgomery County and for our educational institutions as well?
Thank you, Dr. Kennedy. I'm so happy you're where you are, because you all are an example of a local innovation, by the way, at USG. 9 universities in one location. So innovative that often people don't understand what you are and what you do. So I love that tagline. And doing so in a way that makes higher education accessible and affordable to people, which is so critical. I mean, I was talking about this today in our education and culture committee, that the cost of higher education obviously has skyrocketed and is no way commensurate with the growth in wages, like so many things, but it is so out of whack that the system itself, the utility, and the longevity of the system is in question, as you know. And so we have to figure out a better way, but at the same time, we still know that it's still such a powerful tool to help people have opportunity, right? And get a job and get a credential and training and move into the workforce and support themselves and to build community wealth, right? And we have an 8-to-1 racial wealth gap in the state of Maryland, and like much of the country are dealing with the legacy and history of discrimination that advantaged some and disadvantaged others, and having to reckon with how do we repair and reconcile, at the same time having a an argument about being able to tell the truth about what happened. Unfortunately in other, not in Montgomery County, not in Maryland, but in other parts of the country, the battle to tell the truth and to not ban books and the like, because you can't figure out where you're going if you don't understand where you've been.
That's right.
And thankfully we have a commitment to that. But I think things like guaranteed income, which we launched here in MoCo Boost, are a example of, when you give resources that are flexible in a dignified way to people who need it, they're going to use it to improve their standing for themselves and their families. I just visited with 100 or so of the 300 families that we are enrolled in MoCo Boost, who are receiving $800 a month for 2 years. And the ways in which they are utilizing these resources are everything from education to transportation, to getting out of debt, healthcare, all the things that are childcare, all the things that we know are drivers, are the highest cost things, but are critical to your ability to be able to be successful and to build wealth and to even just meet ends meet. And it's relieving pressure for them, and you can see it on their faces. So I think that there is a need in academia. We're studying it with Morgan State and with the Urban Institute, and to lift up and talk about how we build more community wealth through programs like MoCo Boost, but also through education and training. And because, the way things are heading, if we don't create and strengthen our social safety net with the innovation of artificial intelligence and the changing nature of the workforce, we are going to be in a situation that we don't want to be in. We have to provide and relieve pressure for basic human needs so that people can innovate. I think too often we are squeezing the innovation out of people. It's and there used to be a time when patents were equally distributed across the income distribution. Now they're concentrated in the top 1% of earners. And I think a big part of that is because we've made it so hard for people to take risks, to have an idea, to start that business, to, start that new job or go back to school or whatever it is. And so I think we have to catch up to that and provide the supports that will enable people to do that, because that's what's going to build community wealth and success for not only these families but also for our state and our county and our country.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. You brought so much together in that response. Very insightful. And thank you for your leadership, especially around the universal basic income and all of the issues you're leading on. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you, Councilmember Jawando, and thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Kanemi, and thank you, Anne, for your leadership at USG and all that you all are doing to help us solve and answer these issues as part of this continuum. So I just want to appreciate you and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
You too.